Question 1. System analysis indicates a driver in Ontario is running late for an important appointment and is concerned about arriving past the scheduled time. Considering the Highway Traffic Act of Ontario, which approach best mitigates risk and ensures professional conduct? Option A. Follow closely behind other vehicles to encourage them to move faster or create perceived openings. Option B. Proceed through a red traffic signal to avoid waiting for the next light cycle. Option C. Continue driving at or below the posted speed limit and obey all traffic signals, accepting the possibility of a late arrival. Option D. Increase speed significantly above the posted limit to try and make up for lost time. Correct answer is C. Continue driving at or below the posted speed limit and obey all traffic signals, accepting the possibility of a late arrival. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a driver to balance immediate personal convenience against established safety protocols and legal requirements. The pressure to reach a destination quickly, especially when running late, lead to impulsive decisions that compromise safety and adherence to traffic laws. The specific context of Ontario, Canada, means that the Highway Traffic Act and associated regulations are paramount. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves prioritizing safety and legal compliance above all else. This means acknowledging the lateness, but proceeding with the journey in a manner that adheres strictly to the posted speed limits and traffic signals. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the fundamental principles of road safety enshrined in the Ontario Highway Traffic Act, which mandates adherence to speed limits for the prevention of accidents and the protection of all road users. It also upholds the ethical responsibility of a driver to operate a vehicle safely and predictably. Incorrect approaches analysis. Proceeding at a speed significantly above the posted limit to make up for lost time is incorrect because it directly violates Section 128 of the Ontario Highway Traffic Act, which sets maximum speed limits. Exceeding these limits dramatically increases the risk of losing control of the vehicle, reduces reaction time, and escalates the severity of potential collisions. This action demonstrates a failure to uphold the legal and ethical duty of care. Attempting to tailgate other vehicles to encourage them to move faster or to create a perceived opening is also incorrect. This maneuver is not only aggressive and discourteous, but also extremely dangerous. It significantly reduces the following distance, leaving insufficient time to react to sudden braking by the vehicle ahead, thereby violating safe driving practices and potentially contravening provisions related to following too closely. Ignoring a red traffic signal to avoid waiting for the next light cycle is fundamentally illegal and dangerous. This action directly contravenes Section 144 of the Ontario Highway Traffic Act, which mandates stopping at red lights. Running a red light creates a high risk of a severe intersection collision with vehicles or pedestrians proceeding legally on a green light. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing a situation where they are running late should employ a risk assessment framework that prioritizes safety and legal compliance. This involves 1. Acknowledging the time constraint but recognizing that it does not negate legal or safety obligations. 2. Evaluating the potential consequences of deviating from safe driving practices, including increased accident risk, legal penalties, and harm to oneself and others. 3. Committing to operating the vehicle within the bounds of the law and established safety guidelines, even if it means arriving late. 4. Communicating the delay to the intended recipient of their arrival if possible, managing expectations through legitimate means rather than unsafe actions. Question 2. System analysis indicates that a driver in Ontario, Canada, is en route to an important appointment and encounters a sudden, heavy downpour. The driver notices that visibility has significantly decreased, and the road surface appears to be accumulating water. Considering the principles of risk assessment as applied to road safety under Ontario's regulatory framework, which of the following responses best demonstrates professional judgment? Option A. Continue driving at the posted speed limit, focusing intently on the road ahead to compensate for reduced visibility. Option B. Brake erratically and swerve to avoid perceived puddles, prioritizing immediate avoidance of water accumulation. Option C. Reduce speed, increase following distance, and actively scan for potential hazards, preparing to adjust driving behavior further if conditions worsen. Option D. Maintain the original speed and driving plan, assuming the vehicle's tires can handle the conditions, and the appointment is time-sensitive. The correct answer is C. Reduce speed, increase following distance, and actively scan for potential hazards, preparing to adjust driving behavior further if conditions worsen. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a driver to balance the immediate need to reach a destination with the paramount responsibility of ensuring road safety, particularly when faced with unexpected environmental conditions. The driver must exercise sound judgment in assessing risks that are not immediately apparent and make decisions that prioritize the well-being of themselves and others over personal convenience or urgency. The specific context of driving in Ontario, Canada, means adherence to the Ontario Highway Traffic Act and its associated regulations is mandatory. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a proactive and cautious approach to risk assessment. This means recognizing that changing weather conditions, such as the onset of heavy rain, can significantly alter road surface conditions, visibility, and vehicle handling. The driver should actively monitor these changes and adjust their driving behavior accordingly. This includes reducing speed, increasing following distance, and being prepared to stop. This approach aligns with the fundamental duty of care imposed by the Ontario Highway Traffic Act, which requires drivers to operate their vehicles in a safe manner and to be aware of their surroundings and potential hazards. It embodies the principle of defensive driving, a core tenet of road safety education in Ontario. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to maintain the original speed and driving plan without acknowledging the increased risk posed by the heavy rain. This demonstrates a failure to adapt to changing environmental conditions, directly contravening the expectation of safe operation under the Ontario Highway Traffic Act. It shows a lack of proactive risk assessment and a disregard for the potential for hydroplaning, reduced braking effectiveness, and impaired visibility, all of which are heightened risks in heavy rain. Another incorrect approach is to become overly anxious and brake erratically or swerve suddenly. While the intention might be to react to the perceived danger, such unpredictable actions can create new hazards for other road users. This behavior is contrary to the principles of smooth and controlled driving, which are essential for maintaining stability and predictability on the road, as implicitly expected under safe driving practices in Ontario. It indicates a failure to manage the psychological impact of the situation and to respond in a controlled, risk-mitigating manner. A third incorrect approach is to focus solely on reaching the destination quickly and to continue driving as if the weather conditions were normal. This prioritizes personal convenience over safety and demonstrates a severe lapse in judgment and a failure to adhere to the duty of care. It ignores the increased likelihood of accidents in adverse weather and shows a disregard for the potential consequences for oneself and others, which is a direct violation of the spirit and letter of traffic safety laws in Ontario. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a systematic risk assessment process. This involves 1. Hazard identification, recognizing potential dangers, e.g., heavy rain, reduced visibility. 2. Risk analysis, evaluating the likelihood and severity of harm from these hazards, e.g., hydroplaning, loss of control. 3. Risk evaluation, deciding if the risk is acceptable or requires mitigation. 4. Risk treatment, implementing measures to reduce or eliminate the risk, e.g., slowing down, increasing following distance. 5. Risk monitoring, continuously reassessing the situation and adjusting actions as needed. In this scenario, the driver should have identified the heavy rain as a significant hazard, analyzed the increased risk of accidents, evaluated this risk as unacceptable for normal driving, treated the risk by reducing speed and increasing distance, and continuously monitored the road conditions. Question 3. The performance metrics show a consistent pattern of minor speeding infractions and rolling stops by a commercial driver operating within Ontario. As their supervisor, what is the most appropriate risk assessment and intervention approach to address this situation? Option A. Issue a verbal warning to the driver, but do not document the conversation or establish any follow-up measures. Option B. Ignore the infractions as they are minor and unlikely to lead to immediate safety concerns, assuming the driver will self-correct over time. Option C. Review the specific infractions, discuss the observed behaviors with the driver, educate them on the risks and requirements of the Ontario Highway Traffic Act, set clear expectations for improvement, and document the conversation and follow-up plan. Option D. Immediately issue a formal written warning and suspend the driver's route for a period without prior discussion or coaching. The correct answer is C. Review the specific infractions, discuss the observed behaviors with the driver, educate them on the risks and requirements of the Ontario Highway Traffic Act, set clear expectations for improvement, and document the conversation and follow-up plan. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the need to maintain operational efficiency with the paramount duty to ensure public safety and compliance with the Ontario Highway Traffic Act. The driver's consistent minor infractions, while not immediately catastrophic, indicate a pattern of behavior that could escalate into more serious risks. A supervisor must make a judgment call that upholds safety standards without being overly punitive for minor, repeated issues, necessitating a nuanced approach to risk assessment and intervention. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a structured, documented approach that directly addresses the observed behavior and its potential implications. This includes reviewing the driver's performance metrics, identifying the specific nature and frequency of the infractions, e.g., speeding slightly over the limit, rolling stops, and then initiating a formal conversation with the driver. This conversation should focus on educating the driver about the risks associated with these behaviors, reinforcing the requirements of the Ontario Highway Traffic Act, and outlining clear expectations for improvement. It should also involve documenting the discussion and setting a time frame for review of future performance. This approach is correct because it is proactive, educational, and compliant with the principles of responsible supervision and the Ontario Highway Traffic Act's emphasis on safe driving practices. It provides a clear path for correction and establishes a record of intervention. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves dismissing the infractions as minor and not warranting intervention, assuming the driver will eventually correct their behavior. This is professionally unacceptable because it neglects the supervisor's duty to ensure compliance with the Ontario Highway Traffic Act and to proactively manage safety risks. Ignoring a pattern of minor infractions can lead to complacency and a higher likelihood of more serious violations or accidents. Another incorrect approach is to immediately impose severe disciplinary action, such as suspension, without prior discussion or education. This is professionally unsound, as it fails to provide the driver with an opportunity to understand the concerns, learn from the feedback, and correct their behavior. It can also be seen as disproportionate to the nature of the infractions and may lead to resentment and a breakdown in the supervisor-driver relationship, without necessarily achieving the desired safety outcome. A further incorrect approach is to rely solely on informal, verbal warnings without any documentation or follow-up. While informal discussions can be a starting point, the lack of documentation means there is no record of the intervention, no clear expectations set for improvement, and no basis for further action if the behavior continues. This approach undermines accountability and the systematic management of driver performance and safety. Professional reasoning. Professionals in supervisory roles must adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes safety and regulatory compliance. This involves a continuous cycle of performance monitoring, risk identification, communication, education, and documented intervention. When performance metrics reveal a pattern of concerning behavior, the first step should be to gather specific details about the infractions. This information should then be used to engage the driver in a constructive dialogue, explaining the risks and legal requirements. Clear expectations for improvement should be set, and a plan for follow-up and review established. This systematic process ensures that interventions are fair, effective, and aligned with regulatory obligations, such as those outlined in the Ontario Highway Traffic Act. Question 4. The audit findings indicate potential non-compliance with provincial regulations by a client operating in Ontario. What is the most appropriate course of action for the auditor to take to address these findings while adhering to professional ethical standards and legal requirements? Option A. Conduct a detailed internal review of the findings. Consult with the client's senior management and legal department to determine the appropriate remediation strategy, and follow legal and professional guidance for any necessary external reporting. Option B. Discuss the audit findings with other employees within the client's organization who are not directly involved in the risk management or legal review process to gather informal opinions. Option C. Immediately report the potential non-compliance to the relevant provincial regulatory bodies in Ontario without further internal consultation or investigation. Option D. Advise the client to ignore the findings and assume they will self-correct, as direct intervention could complicate ongoing business operations. correct answer is A. Conduct a detailed internal review of the findings. Consult with the client's senior management and legal department to determine the appropriate remediation strategy, and follow legal and professional guidance for any necessary external reporting. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the need to address potential risks identified in audit findings with the imperative to maintain client confidentiality and avoid prejudicing ongoing investigations. The auditor must exercise careful judgment to ensure their actions are both effective in mitigating risk and compliant with professional standards and legal obligations in Ontario. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a multifaceted approach that prioritizes immediate risk mitigation while respecting legal and ethical boundaries. This includes a thorough review of the audit findings to understand the nature and extent of the identified risks, followed by a confidential consultation with senior management and the legal department of the Ontario-based company. This consultation is crucial to determine the appropriate course of action, which may involve internal disciplinary measures, reporting to relevant regulatory bodies in Ontario if legally required, or implementing enhanced internal controls. This approach ensures that risks are addressed proactively and comprehensively, in line with the auditor's duty of care and professional ethical obligations, while also respecting the company's legal standing and the integrity of any ongoing investigations. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to immediately escalate the findings to external regulatory bodies in Ontario without first conducting a thorough internal review and consulting with the company's legal counsel. This could lead to premature reporting, potentially causing undue reputational damage to the company, prejudicing any internal investigation, and violating confidentiality obligations if the findings are not yet substantiated or if the company has a legal right to address them internally first. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the audit findings as minor and take no immediate action, assuming the company will self-correct. This fails to acknowledge the auditor's professional responsibility to identify and report significant risks, potentially exposing the company to further harm and violating auditing standards that mandate appropriate follow-up on identified issues. A third incorrect approach is to discuss the audit findings with other departments or employees not directly involved in the risk management or legal review process. This constitutes a breach of confidentiality and could lead to the spread of unsubstantiated information, creating internal discord and potentially jeopardizing any formal investigation or remediation efforts. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such situations should employ a structured decision-making process. This involves 1. Understanding the scope and implications of the audit findings. 2. Identifying all relevant professional standards, ethical codes, and legal requirements applicable in Ontario. 3. Consulting with internal stakeholders, including legal counsel, to understand the company's position and obligations. 4. Developing a risk mitigation strategy that is both effective and compliant. 5. Documenting all steps taken and decisions made. This systematic approach ensures that actions are well considered, defensible, and aligned with professional integrity. Question 5. The efficiency study reveals that a financial advisor in Ontario, Canada, has identified a proprietary mutual fund that offers a significantly higher commission compared to other available investment products. The advisor is considering recommending this proprietary fund to a client whose investment objectives and risk tolerance appear to align with the fund's general profile. What is the most ethically and regulatorily sound approach for the advisor to take? Option A. Recommend the proprietary fund to the client immediately, given its higher commission potential, assuming the client's profile generally matches the fund's characteristics. Option B. Conduct a thorough suitability assessment for the client, objectively evaluating all available investment options, including non-proprietary funds, to determine the most appropriate recommendation, and disclose any potential conflicts of interest, including commission structures. Option C. Recommend the proprietary fund, and then perform a suitability assessment to justify the recommendation after the fact. Option D. Recommend the proprietary fund to the client without disclosing the higher commission structure, as this information is considered internal compensation details. Correct answer is B. Conduct a thorough suitability assessment for the client, objectively evaluating all available investment options, including non-proprietary funds, to determine the most appropriate recommendation, and disclose any potential conflicts of interest, including commission structures. Explanation: the efficiency study reveals a potential conflict of interest for a financial advisor in Ontario, Canada, who is recommending a proprietary mutual fund to a client. This scenario is professionally challenging because the advisor's personal gain, higher commission, from recommending the proprietary fund could compromise their fiduciary duty to act in the client's best interest. Careful judgment is required to ensure that client needs and suitability supersede any personal financial incentives. The best professional practice involves a thorough suitability assessment that prioritizes the client's financial goals, risk tolerance, and time horizon. This approach mandates that the advisor objectively evaluate all available investment options, including those outside the proprietary product line, to determine the most appropriate solution for the client. Regulatory frameworks in Ontario, such as those enforced by the Ontario Securities Commission (OSC), and industry self-regulatory organizations like the Mutual Fund Dealers Association of Canada (MFDA), require advisors to act with integrity and in the client's best interest. This includes disclosing any potential conflicts of interest and ensuring that recommendations are based solely on the client's needs. Recommending the proprietary fund only after confirming it is the most suitable option, and fully disclosing the commission structure aligns with these regulatory and ethical obligations. Recommending the proprietary fund solely because it offers a higher commission without a comprehensive suitability assessment is ethically unacceptable. This approach prioritizes the advisor's financial gain over the client's well-being, violating the duty of care and potentially breaching MFDA Rule 2.1. Client-specific suitability and OSC regulations regarding fair dealing. Suggesting the proprietary fund and then conducting a superficial suitability assessment afterwards is also professionally unacceptable. The suitability assessment must precede the recommendation. Performing it afterwards suggests the decision to recommend the proprietary fund has already been made, undermining the integrity of the assessment process and failing to meet regulatory standards for objective advice. Recommending the proprietary fund without disclosing the higher commission structure is a clear ethical and regulatory failure. Transparency is paramount in financial advice. Failure to disclose material information, such as the advisor's compensation, erodes client trust and violates MFDA Rule 2.1 and OSC disclosure requirements. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a comprehensive understanding of the client's situation. This involves gathering detailed information about their financial objectives, risk tolerance, and existing portfolio. Next, advisors must identify a range of suitable investment options that meet these criteria, considering both proprietary and non-proprietary products. A rigorous comparison of these options, focusing on performance, fees, and alignment with client needs, should then be conducted. Any potential conflicts of interest, including commission structures, must be identified and disclosed transparently to the client. Finally, the recommendation should be made based on the objective assessment of suitability, with clear documentation of the rationale. Question 6. Market research demonstrates that gathering feedback from individuals undergoing their driver's test in Ontario, Canada, can provide valuable insights for improving the testing experience. Which of the following approaches best ensures ethical conduct and compliance with Ontario's Ministry of Transportation (MTO) guidelines when collecting this feedback? Option A. Suggests to participants that providing detailed feedback might positively influence their driver's test score. Option B. Vaguely mention that the feedback is for improvement without clarifying its specific purpose or separation from the test outcome. Option C. State that providing feedback is a mandatory component of completing the driver's test process. Option D. Clearly inform participants that their feedback is for market research to enhance the driver's test experience and is separate from their test evaluation. Correct answer is D. Clearly inform participants that their feedback is for market research to enhance the driver's test experience and is separate from their test evaluation. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the need to gather comprehensive market data with the ethical obligation to avoid misleading potential participants. The driver's test context in Ontario, Canada, specifically the Ministry of Transportation (MTO) guidelines, dictates a high standard of integrity in all communications related to the testing process. Misrepresenting the purpose or outcomes of research can erode public trust in the testing system and potentially lead to regulatory scrutiny. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any market research is conducted transparently and ethically, without compromising the perceived fairness or validity of the driver's examination. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves clearly and accurately informing potential participants about the nature and purpose of the market research. This means explicitly stating that the feedback is for research purposes to improve the driver's test experience, and that it is entirely separate from the actual test evaluation. This approach aligns with ethical research principles and the spirit of MTO's commitment to a fair and transparent driver licensing system. By being upfront, professionals uphold the integrity of the research and respect the participants' autonomy, ensuring they are not misled into believing their responses will influence their test results. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves implying that providing feedback will directly impact the driver's test score. This is ethically problematic as it creates a false incentive and misrepresents the purpose of the feedback, potentially pressuring individuals to provide responses they might not otherwise. It violates the principle of informed consent and undermines the integrity of the driver's testing process. Another unacceptable approach is to present the feedback collection as a mandatory part of the driver's test. This is misleading and coercive. The driver's test in Ontario is a standardized evaluation, and any supplementary research must be voluntary and clearly distinguished from the official assessment. Failing to do so breaches ethical research conduct and potentially contravenes MTO regulations regarding the administration of driver examinations. A further flawed approach is to vaguely describe the feedback as for improvement, without specifying that it is for market research and not directly tied to the test's immediate outcome. While seemingly innocuous, this lack of specificity can still lead to misinterpretation, where participants might believe their feedback is being used for immediate, individual test adjustments rather than broader program development. This ambiguity fails to meet the standard of clear and transparent communication expected in research involving public services. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes transparency, honesty, and adherence to regulatory guidelines. When conducting market research, especially in sensitive areas like public examinations, the first step is to identify all relevant regulations and ethical codes, in this case, MTO guidelines and general research ethics. Next, clearly define the research objectives and how they will be achieved without compromising the integrity of the primary process. Then, develop communication materials that are unambiguous, accurate, and obtain informed consent. Finally, regularly review the process to ensure ongoing compliance and ethical conduct. Question 7. System analysis indicates a driver in Ontario is running late for an important appointment. Considering the principles of risk assessment and responsible driving under Ontario's Highway Traffic Act, which of the following actions best demonstrates professional judgment? Option A. Checking real-time traffic conditions and potential route disruptions before departing, and having a predetermined alternative route in mind if necessary. Option B. Relying solely on a standard GPS navigation system without checking for live traffic updates or alternative routes. Option C. Proceeding with the journey on the usual route, assuming traffic will be manageable. Option D. Considering exceeding the posted speed limit to make up for lost time. The correct answer is A. Checking real-time traffic conditions and potential route disruptions before departing, and having a predetermined alternative route in mind if necessary. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a driver to balance immediate personal convenience against established safety protocols and legal requirements. The pressure to reach a destination quickly, especially when running late, can lead to impulsive decisions that compromise safety and adherence to traffic laws. Careful judgment is required to prioritize safety and compliance over expediency. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a proactive and responsible approach to risk assessment and management. This means anticipating potential delays, planning the journey with buffer time, and being prepared to adjust the route or schedule if unforeseen circumstances arise. Specifically, this approach involves checking traffic conditions and potential disruptions before departing and having a contingency plan. This aligns with the fundamental ethical duty of a driver to operate a vehicle safely and responsibly, minimizing risks to themselves and others, and adhering to the Highway Traffic Act of Ontario, which mandates safe driving practices and awareness of road conditions. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves proceeding with the journey without adequately assessing current traffic conditions, assuming the usual route will be clear. This demonstrates a failure to exercise due diligence and a disregard for potential hazards, violating the principle of responsible operation under the Highway Traffic Act of Ontario. It prioritizes personal convenience over the safety of oneself and other road users. Another incorrect approach is to consider exceeding the posted speed limit to make up for lost time. This is a direct contravention of the Highway Traffic Act of Ontario, which sets speed limits for safety. It significantly increases the risk of accidents, reduces reaction time, and exacerbates the severity of any collision, representing a severe ethical and legal failure. A further incorrect approach is to rely solely on a GPS navigation system without considering real-time traffic updates or alternative routes. While GPS is a valuable tool, it may not always reflect immediate dynamic traffic changes. This approach can lead to drivers being directed into unexpected congestion or hazardous situations, failing to exercise independent judgment and proactive risk assessment as expected of a responsible driver under Ontario law. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a systematic risk assessment framework. This begins with pre-trip planning, including checking traffic and weather. It involves identifying potential risks, e.g., congestion, adverse weather, mechanical issues, and evaluating their likelihood and impact. Based on this assessment, drivers should develop mitigation strategies, such as allowing extra travel time, choosing alternative routes, or even rescheduling if risks are too high. The decision-making process should always prioritize safety and legal compliance over personal convenience or time pressures. Question 8. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a driver's license applicant in Ontario has demonstrated a critical error during their road test, specifically failing to check blind spots before changing lanes, which created a hazardous situation for another vehicle. The applicant expresses significant distress, explaining they are late for a critical job interview and pleading for a pass. What is the most appropriate course of action for the examiner? Option A. Allow the applicant to continue the test, documenting the error with the understanding that they will receive remedial training. Option B. Fail the applicant immediately due to the critical safety error, regardless of their personal circumstances or explanations. Option C. Pass the applicant, acknowledging their stress and the importance of the interview, and make a note to follow up with them later. Option D. Pass the applicant, but strongly advise them to seek additional driving lessons to address the blind spot issue. The correct answer is B. Fail the applicant immediately due to the critical safety error, regardless of their personal circumstances or explanations. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for a driver's license with the paramount importance of public safety. The examiner must exercise sound judgment, adhering strictly to the Ontario Ministry of Transportation's MTO established testing protocols and safety standards, without succumbing to external pressures or personal biases. The core conflict lies in distinguishing between minor, correctable errors and significant safety risks that would render a candidate unfit to drive. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a systematic evaluation of the candidate's performance against the MTO's official driver examination criteria. This approach prioritizes objective observation of driving skills, adherence to traffic laws, and the ability to identify and respond to hazards. Specifically, the examiner must document all observed errors, categorizing them by severity according to MTO guidelines. A candidate who demonstrates a consistent pattern of minor errors or a single critical error that poses an immediate safety risk would be failed. This aligns with the MTO's mandate to ensure all licensed drivers possess the necessary skills and judgment to operate a vehicle safely on Ontario roads, thereby protecting all road users. The decision to pass or fail must be based solely on the observed performance during the test, irrespective of the candidate's personal circumstances or expressed urgency. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves passing the candidate despite the observation of a critical error, such as failing to yield to oncoming traffic at an intersection, based on the candidate's explanation of being nervous. This is ethically and regulatorily unacceptable because it bypasses the established safety protocols designed to prevent accidents. Nervousness, while understandable, does not negate the immediate danger posed by such an error, and passing a candidate who demonstrates a critical lapse in judgment or skill directly violates the MTO's commitment to public safety. Another incorrect approach is to fail the candidate solely based on a few minor errors, such as slightly exceeding the speed limit by a few kilometers per hour on a clear stretch of road, without considering the overall context or the candidate's ability to correct their mistakes. While speed is a factor, the MTO's evaluation considers the totality of the performance. Failing a candidate for minor, non-hazardous infractions without allowing for demonstration of overall safe driving competence is not in line with the comprehensive assessment methodology. A third incorrect approach is to allow the candidate to continue the test and potentially pass them after they have committed a critical error, with the intention of providing additional instruction later. This is fundamentally flawed, as the purpose of the road test is to assess current, safe driving ability. Allowing a candidate who has demonstrated a critical safety failure to continue driving, even with the promise of future instruction, undermines the integrity of the testing process and exposes other road users to unnecessary risk. The MTO's regulations require immediate failure upon commission of certain critical errors. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this role should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes objective observation, adherence to established protocols, and a commitment to public safety. This involves 1. Thoroughly understanding and applying the MTO's driver examination standards and criteria for passing and failing. 2. Maintaining strict impartiality and avoiding emotional responses or external influences. 3. Documenting all observations accurately and objectively. 4. Making a clear, evidence-based decision at the conclusion of the test based solely on the candidate's demonstrated driving performance. 5. Recognizing that the primary responsibility is to ensure the safety of all road users in Ontario. Question 9. The assessment process reveals a candidate for a Bristol driver's license who has consistently made minor driving errors throughout their practical test, such as slightly misjudging distances when parking or momentarily hesitating at junctions. Considering the regulatory framework for driver licensing in Bristol, which of the following approaches best reflects professional and safe assessment practices? Option A. Focus solely on the candidate's ability to execute specific maneuvers perfectly, overlooking any recurring minor errors in general driving if the maneuvers themselves are completed without major faults. Option B. Evaluate the cumulative impact of the minor errors to determine if they collectively demonstrate a lack of safe driving competence or a potential risk to road users, and make a decision based on this overall assessment. Option C. Pass the candidate, as individual errors were minor and did not directly cause an immediate dangerous situation, assuming nerves are a factor. Option D. Fail the candidate immediately upon the occurrence of the third minor error, regardless of its nature or potential impact, to strictly adhere to a numerical limit. Correct answer is B. Evaluate the cumulative impact of the minor errors to determine if they collectively demonstrate a lack of safe driving competence or a potential risk to road users, and make a decision based on this overall assessment. Explanation. The assessment process reveals a candidate for a Bristol driver's license who has demonstrated a pattern of minor, but consistent, errors during their practical driving test. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the examiner to balance the need to uphold public safety standards with the requirement to fairly assess a candidate's overall competence. A purely punitive approach might unfairly penalize a candidate who is generally safe but prone to small mistakes, while an overly lenient approach could compromise the integrity of the licensing system and put other road users at risk. Careful judgment is required to determine if these minor errors indicate a fundamental lack of skill or control, or if they are simply indicative of nerves or a need for further practice. The best professional practice in this situation involves a holistic assessment of the candidate's performance, focusing on whether the cumulative effect of the minor errors demonstrates a persistent inability to drive safely and competently, or if they are isolated incidents that do not fundamentally compromise road safety. This approach aligns with the principles of the Bristol driver's license regulations, which emphasize assessing a driver's ability to operate a vehicle safely and in accordance with traffic laws. The examiner must consider the severity and frequency of the errors, and crucially, whether they indicate a risk to the candidate or other road users. If the errors, though minor individually, collectively suggest a lack of control or understanding that could lead to a dangerous situation, then failing the candidate is the appropriate course of action. This ensures that only drivers who can consistently demonstrate safe driving practices are licensed, thereby protecting public safety. An approach that involves overlooking a pattern of minor errors simply because they are individually minor is professionally unacceptable. This fails to acknowledge that a series of small mistakes can, in aggregate, create a significant risk. For example, repeatedly failing to check mirrors before changing lanes, even if no immediate danger arises, demonstrates a fundamental flaw in defensive driving that could lead to an accident. Similarly, an approach that focuses solely on the number of errors without considering their potential impact on road safety is also flawed. Bristol driver's license regulations are designed to ensure safe driving, not merely to count minor infractions. Failing to consider the context and potential consequences of these errors would be a dereliction of the examiner's duty to public safety. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes safety and fairness. This involves understanding the specific criteria for passing a driving test as outlined in the Bristol driver's license regulation, and applying them consistently. When faced with borderline cases, examiners should consider the overall impression of the candidate's driving. Are they in control of the vehicle? Do they demonstrate an understanding of traffic laws and road conditions? Are their actions predictable and safe? If the answer to these questions is consistently no due to recurring minor errors, then a fail is justified. This framework encourages a reasoned, evidence-based decision that upholds regulatory standards and protects the public. Question 10. Analysis of a Bristol driver training scenario reveals that a learner driver is practicing the pulling up on the right side of the road, reversing for 2 car lengths, and rejoining the traffic maneuver on a moderately busy residential street. The instructor observes that the learner has a tendency to overcorrect steering inputs, leading to a 40% chance of the vehicle's rear end drifting too close to parked cars, likelihood score of 4 out of 5, and a 20% chance of minor contact with a parked car, severity score of 2 out of 5. The instructor also notes that the road width allows for a single car to pass comfortably, but a second car would require careful negotiation, likelihood of needing to wait for oncoming traffic, 3 out of 5. Severity of a minor collision with oncoming traffic, 3 out of 5. Using a risk matrix where risk equals likelihood x severity, what is the calculated risk score for the learner's steering control issues and the risk score for the potential interaction with oncoming traffic, and what is the total combined risk score for this specific aspect of the maneuver? Option A. Steering control risk score, 20. Oncoming traffic risk score, 15. Total combined risk score, 35. Option B. Steering control risk score, 8. Oncoming traffic risk score, 9. Total combined risk score, 17. Option C. Steering control risk score, 12. Oncoming traffic risk score, 6. Total combined risk score, 18. Option D. Steering control risk score, 40. Oncoming traffic risk score, 30. Total combined risk score, 70. The correct answer is B. Steering control risk score, 8. Oncoming traffic risk score, 9. Total combined risk score, 17. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Bristol driver training instructor due to the inherent variability in learner-driver performance and the need to balance thorough risk assessment with efficient lesson planning. The instructor must accurately quantify the risk associated with a specific maneuver, considering both the learner's current skill level and the environmental factors, to ensure safety without unduly delaying the learning process. This requires a nuanced understanding of risk assessment principles and their practical application within the context of DVSA, Driver and Vehicle Standards Agency, Guidelines for Driver Training in the UK. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a systematic, quantitative approach to risk assessment. This means breaking down the maneuver into its constituent components, identifying potential hazards for each component, and assigning a likelihood and severity score. For example, when assessing a maneuver like parallel parking on a moderately busy residential street in Bristol, the instructor would consider factors such as the learner's tendency to oversteer or understeer, likelihood of hitting a parked car, proximity of other vehicles and pedestrians, severity of impact, and the road width, likelihood of needing multiple attempts. By assigning numerical values to these factors, the instructor can calculate a risk score. For instance, if the likelihood of a minor collision is rated 3 out of 5, and the severity of that collision is rated 2 out of 5, the risk score for that specific hazard would be /3 3 times 2 equals 6. The total risk score for the maneuver would be the sum of scores for all identified hazards. This approach aligns with DVSA guidance, which emphasizes a proactive and evidence-based approach to risk management, ensuring that training is tailored to address the most significant risks. The instructor would then use this calculated risk score to determine the appropriate level of supervision and instruction required, potentially by adjusting the complexity of the task or providing more targeted feedback. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to rely solely on a qualitative, subjective assessment of risk. This might involve the instructor simply stating that a maneuver is a bit tricky or needs more practice, without quantifying the specific risks involved. This fails to provide a clear, objective basis for determining the necessary safety measures or the extent of supervision. It also makes it difficult to track progress or demonstrate a systematic approach to risk management, which could be a point of concern during a DVSA inspection. Another incorrect approach is to overemphasize environmental factors while neglecting the learner's specific skill deficits. For example, if the instructor focuses heavily on the busy nature of a Bristol road, but fails to adequately assess the learner's ability to judge distances or control the vehicle precisely, the risk assessment will be incomplete. This can lead to an underestimation of the actual risk posed by the learner's actions in that environment. A further incorrect approach is to use a fixed, predetermined risk assessment for all learners attempting the same maneuver, regardless of individual differences. This fails to acknowledge that each learner has a unique skill set and learning pace. A rigid approach ignores the need for personalized training and can lead to either unnecessary caution, hindering progress, or insufficient safety measures, increasing the risk of an incident. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a structured, data-driven approach to risk assessment. This involves 1. Hazard identification, systematically identifying all potential hazards associated with a specific driving task or maneuver. 2. Risk analysis, evaluating the likelihood of each hazard occurring and the potential severity of its consequences. 3. Risk evaluation, combining likelihood and severity to determine an overall risk level. 4. Risk treatment, implementing appropriate control measures, e.g., increased supervision, simplified task, additional instruction based on the evaluated risk level. 5. Review, regularly reviewing the effectiveness of control measures and updating the risk assessment as needed. This systematic process ensures that decisions are informed, justifiable, and aligned with regulatory requirements and ethical obligations to ensure learner safety. Question 11. The review process indicates that a new applicant for a Bristol driver's test license in Ontario, Canada, has a history of minor traffic infractions and has self-declared good health, but a recent medical report from their physician notes a mild, controlled condition that could potentially affect reaction time under specific circumstances. What is the most appropriate risk assessment approach for the licensing officer to adopt? Option A. Rely solely on the applicant's self-declaration of good health and disregard the physician's report, as the applicant is the primary source of information regarding their well-being. Option B. Issue the Bristol driver's test license immediately, as the traffic infractions are minor and the applicant has self-declared good health, assuming the physician's note is not a significant concern. Option C. Conduct a detailed review of the applicant's complete driving record. Consult with the applicant's physician to understand the implications of the medical condition on driving, and assess if any additional testing or restrictions are warranted before issuing the license. Option D. Deny the Bristol driver's test license application outright due to the mention of a medical condition, regardless of its severity or the physician's assessment. The correct answer is C. Conduct a detailed review of the applicant's complete driving record. Consult with the applicant's physician to understand the implications of the medical condition on driving, and assess if any additional testing or restrictions are warranted before issuing the license. Explanation. The review process indicates a potential gap in the risk assessment procedures for a new driver applying for their Bristol driver's test license in Ontario, Canada. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the licensing officer to balance the need for efficient processing with the paramount duty of ensuring public safety on Ontario's roads. A thorough risk assessment is crucial to identify any underlying issues that might compromise a driver's ability to operate a vehicle safely, thereby protecting other road users. The correct approach involves a comprehensive review of the applicant's driving history, medical information, and any specific concerns raised during the application process. This approach is correct because it aligns with the Ontario Highway Traffic Act and the Ministry of Transportation's guidelines for driver licensing, which mandate a diligent assessment of an applicant's fitness to drive. By proactively identifying and addressing potential risks, such as undisclosed medical conditions or a history of serious traffic violations, the licensing officer upholds their ethical responsibility to public safety and adheres to the regulatory framework designed to prevent unqualified individuals from obtaining a license. An incorrect approach would be to solely rely on the applicant's self-declaration of fitness to drive without further investigation, even if minor discrepancies are noted. This fails to meet the regulatory requirement for due diligence and could lead to the licensing of an individual who poses a significant risk to public safety. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss concerns raised by a medical professional without a thorough review and consultation, as this disregards expert advice and the legal obligation to consider all relevant information. Finally, prioritizing speed of processing over the thoroughness of the risk assessment is a critical ethical and regulatory failure, as it compromises the integrity of the licensing system and the safety of the public. Professionals should employ a systematic decision-making process that begins with understanding the regulatory requirements and ethical obligations. This involves carefully reviewing all submitted documentation, identifying any red flags or inconsistencies, and seeking clarification or further information when necessary. A risk-based approach, where potential hazards are identified and mitigated, is essential. This includes consulting with relevant experts or authorities when dealing with complex cases, ensuring that decisions are well documented and justifiable based on the evidence and applicable laws. Question 12. Performance analysis shows a financial advisor in Ontario, Canada, is considering investment recommendations for a new client. The client has expressed a strong desire for aggressive growth and has mentioned a general comfort with risk. What is the most appropriate approach for the advisor to take in assessing this client's risk profile and making investment recommendations? Option A. Utilize the client's risk profile from a similar client profile completed 5 years ago, assuming their risk tolerance has not significantly changed. Option B. Recommend a portfolio heavily weighted towards high-risk, high-return investments, given the client's stated desire for aggressive growth and general comfort with risk. Option C. Rely on the client's stated comfort with risk and their expressed desire for aggressive growth as the primary determinants for investment selection, without further in-depth financial inquiry. Option D. Conduct a detailed, documented risk assessment that thoroughly explores the client's financial situation, investment objectives, time horizon, and capacity to absorb potential losses, using this comprehensive understanding to select suitable investments. The correct answer is D. Conduct a detailed, documented risk assessment that thoroughly explores the client's financial situation, investment objectives, time horizon, and capacity to absorb potential losses, using this comprehensive understanding to select suitable investments. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a financial advisor in Ontario, Canada, to balance client needs with regulatory obligations. The advisor must assess the client's risk tolerance and financial situation accurately to recommend suitable investments, while also adhering to the Ontario Securities Commission (OSC) regulations regarding suitability and know your client (KIC) requirements. Misjudging the client's capacity for risk or failing to gather sufficient information can lead to inappropriate recommendations, potentially causing financial harm to the client and regulatory breaches for the advisor. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough and documented risk assessment process that directly informs investment recommendations. This approach prioritizes understanding the client's complete financial picture, including their investment objectives, time horizon, financial situation, and risk tolerance, as mandated by OSC Rule 31-103 registration requirements, exemptions, and ongoing registrant obligations. By systematically gathering and analyzing this information, the advisor can then select investments that are genuinely suitable, demonstrating due diligence, and fulfilling their fiduciary duty to act in the client's best interest. This detailed understanding ensures that any investment proposed aligns with the client's capacity to absorb potential losses and their likelihood of achieving their financial goals. Incorrect approach is analysis. recommending a high-risk, high-return investment solely based on the client's stated desire for aggressive growth, without a comprehensive assessment of their financial capacity to withstand potential losses, is a regulatory failure. This overlooks the crucial element of risk tolerance as it relates to the client's overall financial stability and liquidity needs, potentially exposing them to unacceptable levels of risk. Another incorrect approach is to rely on a previous client profile from several years ago without updating it. Client circumstances, financial situations, and risk appetites can change significantly over time, and failing to reevaluate these factors violates the ongoing obligation to ensure recommendations remain suitable. Finally, suggesting investments that are complex or illiquid without a clear understanding of the client's investment knowledge and experience or their need for access to funds is also a breach. This can lead to the client making decisions they do not fully comprehend or being unable to access their capital when needed, contravening the principles of suitability and client understanding. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a structured, client-centric approach to risk assessment. This involves a multifaceted evaluation that goes beyond superficial statements. Key steps include: 1. Comprehensive data gathering, systematically collecting information on financial situation, investment objectives, time horizon, and risk tolerance. 2. Objective risk assessment, evaluating the client's capacity to bear risk based on their financial stability, liquidity needs, and investment knowledge. 3. Documentation, meticulously recording all information gathered and the rationale behind risk assessment conclusions. 4. Recommendation alignment, ensuring all investment recommendations are directly supported by the documented risk assessment and align with the client's best interests and regulatory requirements. This systematic process mitigates risk for both the client and the advisor, fostering trust and compliance. Question 13. Operational review demonstrates that a learner driver in Ontario has completed all scheduled training sessions for their G2 license preparation. The instructor, however, has a personal vacation planned immediately after the learner's scheduled test date and feels the learner is mostly ready, but still exhibits minor hesitations in complex merging situations. Considering the regulatory framework for driver licensing in Ontario, which approach best reflects professional responsibility and adherence to safety standards? Option A. Recommend the learner for the G2 road test based on a general feeling of confidence, assuming they will perform adequately on the day of the test. Option B. Conduct a final, detailed assessment against all MTO G2 road test criteria, documenting any remaining areas for improvement, and providing a recommendation based on objective performance, even if it means advising further practice before the test. Option C. Encourage the learner to simply try their best on the G2 road test, without a formal assessment of their preparedness against MTO standards. Option D. Advise the learner to postpone their G2 road test to a date after the instructor's vacation, regardless of the learner's current readiness. The correct answer is B. Conduct a final, detailed assessment against all MTO G2 road test criteria, documenting any remaining areas for improvement, and providing a recommendation based on objective performance, even if it means advising further practice before the test. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for operational efficiency with the long-term implications of safety and regulatory compliance. A driver's instructor, acting in a supervisory capacity, must make a judgment call that could impact a learner driver's progress and, more importantly, public safety on the roads of Ontario. The pressure to complete training within a time frame, coupled with the instructor's personal assessment of risk, necessitates careful consideration of established protocols and ethical responsibilities. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough, documented assessment of the learner driver's performance against the Ontario Ministry of Transportation's MTO established criteria for the G2 road test. This approach prioritizes objective evaluation and adherence to regulatory standards. By meticulously documenting observed behaviors, identifying specific areas of concern, and cross-referencing these with the MTO's expectations, the instructor ensures a fair and transparent assessment. This aligns with the MTO's mandate to ensure all licensed drivers possess the necessary skills and knowledge to operate a vehicle safely, thereby upholding public trust and regulatory integrity. The documentation serves as a record of the training provided and the basis for the recommendation, protecting both the instructor and the learner. Incorrect approach is analysis, recommending the learner for the G2 road test solely based on a general feeling of confidence, without specific, documented evidence of meeting all MTO requirements, is professionally unacceptable. This approach bypasses the structured risk assessment mandated by the MTO and relies on subjective intuition, which can be flawed and does not provide a defensible rationale for the recommendation. It risks placing an inadequately prepared driver on public roads, potentially endangering themselves and others, and failing to uphold the MTO's safety standards. Suggesting the learner postpone the test due to the instructor's personal inconvenience, such as an upcoming vacation, is also professionally unacceptable. This prioritizes the instructor's personal schedule over the learner's training progress and the MTO's safety objectives. It demonstrates a lack of commitment to the learner's development and a disregard for the structured progression required for safe driving. Advising the learner to just try their best on the test without a clear indication that they have met all the necessary skill benchmarks, as defined by the MTO, is insufficient. While encouragement is important, it does not substitute for a professional assessment of readiness. This approach fails to provide the learner with a realistic understanding of their preparedness and does not fulfill the instructor's responsibility to ensure the learner is adequately skilled according to provincial standards. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this role should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding and internalizing the governing regulatory requirements, MTO's G2 road test standards. This is followed by objective data collection through observation and assessment against these standards. The next step involves critical analysis of the collected data to identify strengths and weaknesses. Based on this analysis, a professional judgment is made, always prioritizing safety and regulatory compliance. Finally, clear and transparent communication of the assessment and recommendation to the learner is essential, supported by thorough documentation. Question 14. Investigation of a driver's response to a persistent, illuminated brake system warning light on their vehicle while driving on Highway 401 in Ontario. What is the most responsible course of action to ensure compliance with the Ontario Highway Traffic Act and public safety? Option A. Ignore the warning light and continue the journey, as the vehicle appears to be braking normally. Option B. Attempt to diagnose and potentially fix the brake system issue roadside using available tools and knowledge. Option C. Continue driving to the nearest destination, assuming the warning light is a minor malfunction that does not immediately affect braking performance. Option D. Immediately pull over to a safe location off the highway to assess the situation and contact roadside assistance or a mechanic. The correct answer is D. Immediately pull over to a safe location off the highway to assess the situation and contact roadside assistance or a mechanic. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a driver to balance immediate personal convenience with the legal and safety obligations imposed by the Ontario Highway Traffic Act. The driver faces a conflict between a perceived minor inconvenience and the potential for a serious safety hazard or legal infraction. Careful judgment is required to prioritize public safety and legal compliance over personal expediency. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves immediately ceasing the operation of the vehicle and addressing the issue in a manner that ensures safety and compliance with the Ontario Highway Traffic Act. This approach prioritizes the integrity of the vehicle's safety systems and adheres to the legal requirement that vehicles must be maintained in a safe operating condition. Specifically, it involves pulling over to a safe location, assessing the problem, and taking appropriate action, which may include ceasing operation until the issue is resolved by a qualified mechanic. This aligns with the general duty of care owed by all road users to ensure their vehicle does not pose a danger to themselves or others, as implicitly required by the Act's provisions on vehicle safety and operation. Incorrect approaches analysis. Continuing to drive with a known, potentially critical warning light illuminated, even if the vehicle appears to be functioning normally, is professionally unacceptable. This approach disregards the manufacturer's warning system, which is designed to alert the driver to potential malfunctions that could compromise safety or lead to more significant damage. Violates the spirit, if not the letter, of the Ontario Highway Traffic Act's requirements for maintaining a vehicle in a safe condition. Ignoring the warning light and assuming it is a minor issue is also professionally unacceptable. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a failure to take seriously a system designed to prevent accidents or breakdowns. It prioritizes convenience over safety and legal responsibility, potentially leading to a dangerous situation on the road. Attempting to diagnose and fix a complex mechanical issue without proper training or tools while on the roadside is professionally unacceptable and potentially dangerous. While proactive, it bypasses the established procedures for vehicle maintenance and repair, which typically involve qualified mechanics and appropriate workshop environments. This could exacerbate the problem or create new hazards. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes safety and legal compliance. When faced with a vehicle warning light, the immediate step should be to consult the vehicle's owner's manual for specific guidance, pull over to a safe location if the warning indicates a potential safety hazard, and seek professional diagnosis and repair from a qualified mechanic. This systematic approach ensures that vehicle issues are addressed responsibly and in accordance with regulatory expectations. Question 15. Comparative studies suggest that driver behavior at intersections significantly impacts road safety. In Ontario, Canada, a driver approaches an intersection controlled by a traffic signal displaying a flashing red light. The driver is running slightly late for an appointment and observes no other vehicles immediately visible. What is the most appropriate course of action according to the Ontario Highway Traffic Act and safe driving principles? Option A. Slow down significantly but proceed through the intersection without coming to a complete stop, as no immediate hazards are apparent. Option B. Proceed cautiously through the intersection, assuming no other vehicles are approaching due to the lack of immediate visual confirmation. Option C. Honk the horn to alert any unseen potential traffic before proceeding through the intersection without a full stop. Option D. Come to a complete stop before entering the intersection, scan for traffic and pedestrians, and proceed only when it is safe to do so, yielding to any traffic lawfully within or approaching the intersection. Correct answer is D. Come to a complete stop before entering the intersection, scan for traffic and pedestrians, and proceed only when it is safe to do so, yielding to any traffic lawfully within or approaching the intersection. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a driver to balance immediate personal convenience with the overarching legal and safety obligations mandated by the Ontario Highway Traffic Act. The temptation to proceed without a proper assessment of the situation, especially when under time pressure, is significant. Careful judgment is required to prioritize safety and compliance over expediency. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough, real-time assessment of the intersection's conditions, including traffic flow, pedestrian activity, and visibility, before proceeding. This approach aligns with the fundamental principles of safe driving and the legal requirements under the Ontario Highway Traffic Act, which mandates drivers to proceed only when it is safe to do so. Specifically, Section 134. 1 of the Act states that a driver approaching a traffic control signal that is showing a flashing red signal shall stop before entering the intersection and shall yield the right-of-way to traffic lawfully within the intersection or approaching the intersection so closely as to constitute an immediate hazard. This proactive safety check ensures compliance and minimizes risk. Incorrect approaches analysis. Proceeding immediately based on the assumption that no other vehicles are approaching without a visual confirmation violates the duty of care and the specific requirements of a flashing red signal. This approach disregards the potential for unseen hazards and directly contravenes the legal obligation to stop and yield. Another incorrect approach is to proceed cautiously, but without a complete stop, which still fails to meet the statutory requirement of a full stop before entering the intersection, thereby increasing the risk of collision and violating the Act. Relying solely on the absence of immediate visible traffic without considering potential approaching vehicles or pedestrians is an insufficient risk assessment and neglects the immediate hazard clause of the legislation. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a systematic decision-making process when encountering traffic control devices. This involves 1. Recognizing the signal type and its associated rules, e.g., flashing red means stop. 2. Executing the required action, stopping. 3. Conducting a comprehensive visual scan of all approaches to the intersection. 4. Assessing potential hazards, including other vehicles, pedestrians, and cyclists. 5. Proceeding only when the intersection is clear and it is safe to do so, yielding to any traffic already lawfully in the intersection or approaching closely. This methodical approach ensures both legal compliance and the highest standard of road safety. Question 16. The investigation demonstrates that a driver in Ontario is running late for an important personal appointment and is tempted to skip the mandatory pre-drive safety checks. Which approach best balances immediate personal needs with legal and safety obligations? Option A. Perform a very quick, superficial check of the vehicle's critical components to save time. Option B. Skip the pre-drive safety checks entirely to ensure arriving on time for the personal appointment. Option C. Rely on the fact that the vehicle was recently serviced and assume it is safe to drive without performing the checks. Option D. Complete all mandatory pre-drive safety checks thoroughly before departing, even if it means being slightly later for the personal appointment. The correct answer is D. Complete all mandatory pre-drive safety checks thoroughly before departing, even if it means being slightly later for the personal appointment. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a driver to balance immediate personal needs with the legal and safety obligations of operating a vehicle. The temptation to prioritize a personal emergency over a mandatory safety check can lead to significant risks for the driver and others on the road. Careful judgment is required to assess the urgency of the personal situation against the potential consequences of neglecting a critical safety procedure. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves prioritizing the immediate safety of oneself and others by completing the mandatory pre-drive checks as required by the Ontario Highway Traffic Act. This approach acknowledges that while personal situations can be stressful, the legal and ethical responsibility to ensure the vehicle is in a safe operating condition before commencing a journey is paramount. Failing to perform these checks could lead to an accident, exacerbating the original personal issue and creating new legal liabilities. The Highway Traffic Act of Ontario mandates that drivers ensure their vehicles are in a safe condition. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to skip the pre-drive checks due to a personal emergency. This directly violates the spirit and letter of the Ontario Highway Traffic Act, which places the onus on the driver to ensure vehicle safety. Ethically, it demonstrates a disregard for the safety of other road users. Another incorrect approach is to perform a cursory, incomplete check. While appearing to address the requirement, this is functionally equivalent to skipping the checks if critical safety aspects are overlooked. It creates a false sense of security and still carries the risks associated with an unsafe vehicle, failing to meet the regulatory standard for a thorough inspection. A further incorrect approach is to assume the vehicle is fine because it was recently serviced. While recent servicing reduces the likelihood of a fault, it does not eliminate it. Mechanical issues can arise unexpectedly, and the pre-drive checks are designed to catch these immediate problems, regardless of recent maintenance history. Relying solely on past service records without performing the required checks is a regulatory failure. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes safety and legal compliance. This involves 1. Recognizing the mandatory nature of pre-drive checks under Ontario law. 2. Evaluating the urgency of personal circumstances against the immediate safety risks. 3. Understanding that no personal situation justifies compromising road safety. 4. Implementing a procedure to address the personal situation immediately after ensuring the vehicle is safe, or seeking alternative transportation if the personal emergency absolutely prevents the safety checks. Question 17. Assessment of personal well-being before commencing a planned journey on the roads of Ontario, Canada, is a critical component of responsible driving. If a driver experiences mild symptoms such as a headache and slight fatigue, what is the most appropriate risk assessment approach to ensure public safety? Option A. Take over-the-counter medication for the symptoms and immediately commence the journey, assuming it will improve driving ability. Option B. Drive cautiously, acknowledging the symptoms but believing they are minor enough not to significantly impact driving performance. Option C. Postpone the journey until symptoms have completely subsided and the driver feels fully alert and capable. Option D. Proceed with the journey, attempting to manage the symptoms by focusing intently on the road and hoping they do not worsen. Correct answer is C. Postpone the journey until symptoms have completely subsided and the driver feels fully alert and capable. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a driver to balance immediate personal needs with the legal and safety obligations of operating a vehicle. The temptation to prioritize personal convenience over adherence to traffic laws, especially when feeling unwell, is a common pitfall. Careful judgment is required to assess the severity of the symptoms and their potential impact on driving ability, ensuring public safety is not compromised. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves recognizing that any impairment, including mild illness, can affect reaction times, concentration, and overall driving control. Therefore, the most responsible action is to postpone the journey until fully recovered. This aligns with the fundamental ethical duty of a driver to ensure they are in a fit condition to operate a vehicle safely, thereby protecting themselves and other road users. This approach directly addresses the core principle of risk assessment, identifying potential hazards, impaired driving ability, and mitigating them by avoiding the risky activity. Incorrect approaches analysis. Continuing the journey while feeling unwell, even with mild symptoms, is professionally unacceptable. This approach fails to adequately assess the risk of impaired driving. Even seemingly minor symptoms like a headache or fatigue can subtly degrade cognitive function and motor skills, increasing the likelihood of an accident. This violates the implicit duty of care owed to other road users and potentially breaches traffic regulations that mandate drivers be in a condition to drive safely. Attempting to push through the symptoms by relying on over-the-counter medication without understanding its potential side effects on driving is also professionally unsound. Many common medications can cause drowsiness, dizziness, or blurred vision, all of which are dangerous when driving. This approach demonstrates a failure to conduct a thorough risk assessment, as it overlooks the potential for medication-induced impairment. It also bypasses the crucial step of consulting a medical professional or pharmacist about the suitability of the medication for driving. Seeking to minimize the symptoms by simply ignoring them and hoping they resolve during the drive is a dangerous form of self-deception. This approach actively disregards the potential for the symptoms to worsen or to impair driving ability in unforeseen ways. It prioritizes personal convenience over safety and demonstrates a lack of responsible risk assessment, potentially leading to a serious incident. Professional reasoning. Professionals in any field, including driving, must adopt a proactive and cautious approach to risk assessment. When faced with a situation where personal well-being might impact professional responsibilities, the decision-making process should involve 1. Identifying potential hazards or impairments. 2. Evaluating the severity of the hazard and its potential consequences. 3. Determining the most effective mitigation strategy, which often means avoiding the activity altogether if the risk cannot be acceptably managed. In driving, this translates to always ensuring one is fully fit and unimpaired before getting behind the wheel. Question 18. Compliance review shows that a Bristol-based driving test examiner is consistently completing pre-test route checks in a perfunctory manner, often relying on general knowledge rather than specific, up-to-date route analysis. What is the most appropriate risk assessment approach for this examiner to adopt to ensure compliance with DVSA guidelines and promote road safety? Option A. Inform the candidate of all potential hazards for the entire testing area at the commencement of the test, without undertaking specific route reconnaissance. Option B. Proceed with the driving test assuming the candidate's general driving competence will allow them to navigate any route safely, without specific pre-test route analysis. Option C. Conduct a detailed pre-test reconnaissance of the planned driving test route, identifying specific hazards, traffic patterns, and potential risks, and then clearly communicate any necessary precautions to the candidate. Option D. Only address potential hazards during the driving test if they become apparent spontaneously, rather than conducting any prior route assessment. The correct answer is C. Conduct a detailed pre-test reconnaissance of the planned driving test route, identifying specific hazards, traffic patterns, and potential risks, and then clearly communicate any necessary precautions to the candidate. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the need to maintain operational efficiency with the paramount duty to ensure client safety and adherence to regulatory standards. The pressure to complete tasks quickly can create a temptation to overlook potential risks, making careful judgment and a robust risk assessment process essential. The specific context of Bristol's driving test environment, governed by the Driver and Vehicle Standards Agency (DVSA) guidelines, means that any deviation from established safety protocols can have serious consequences, including the risk of accidents and regulatory sanctions. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves proactively identifying potential hazards associated with the driving test route and implementing appropriate mitigation strategies before the test commences. This includes a thorough review of the planned route, considering factors such as road conditions, traffic patterns, and known challenging junctions. The examiner should then communicate any identified risks and necessary precautions to the candidate in a clear and concise manner, ensuring the candidate understands how to navigate these situations safely. This approach aligns with the DVSA core objective of promoting road safety and ensuring that candidates demonstrate a competent and safe driving standard. It directly addresses the risk assessment requirement by embedding it into the pre-test preparation and execution. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves proceeding with the test without any specific route risk assessment, assuming the candidate's general driving ability will suffice. This fails to acknowledge the DVSA emphasis on proactive risk management and the potential for specific route hazards to disproportionately affect a candidate's performance and safety. It neglects the examiner's responsibility to anticipate and manage risks. Another unacceptable approach is to only address potential hazards if they arise spontaneously during the test. This reactive stance is insufficient as it relies on chance rather than systematic identification and preparation. It places undue pressure on the candidate to react to unforeseen dangers without prior guidance, potentially compromising safety and the fairness of the assessment. A further flawed approach is to inform the candidate of all potential hazards at the very beginning of the test without any prior route reconnaissance. While communication is important, this method lacks the crucial element of pre-assessment and mitigation planning. It can overwhelm the candidate and does not demonstrate the examiner's proactive role in ensuring a safe testing environment. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field should adopt a systematic risk management framework. This involves 1. Hazard identification, regularly reviewing and understanding the specific risks associated with the testing environment and routes. 2. Risk assessment, evaluating the likelihood and severity of identified hazards. 3. Risk mitigation, developing and implementing strategies to reduce or eliminate risks. 4. Communication, clearly conveying relevant information and precautions to the candidate. 5. Monitoring and review, continuously evaluating the effectiveness of mitigation strategies and adapting as necessary. This structured approach ensures that safety and regulatory compliance are prioritized, leading to fair and effective assessments. Question 19. Regulatory review indicates that a driver is running late for an important appointment in Bristol and is approaching a junction with a red traffic light. The designated route requires turning left, but a shortcut through a residential street appears to offer a quicker path, though it involves navigating a street with a lower speed limit and potentially unfamiliar driveways. What is the most appropriate course of action for the driver to demonstrate responsible and lawful driving? Option A. Proceed through the red traffic light to avoid significant delay. Option B. Continue on the designated route, stopping at the red traffic light and proceeding only when it is safe and legal to do so. Option C. Turn left immediately at the red traffic light, assuming no other traffic is present. Option D. Take the shortcut through the residential street, exceeding the speed limit to make up for lost time. The correct answer is B. Continue on the designated route, stopping at the red traffic light and proceeding only when it is safe and legal to do so. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a driver to balance immediate personal convenience with adherence to traffic laws and the safety of others. The temptation to take a shortcut, especially when running late, can lead to significant risks. A driver's judgment in such moments is critical, as it directly impacts public safety and legal compliance. The core challenge lies in prioritizing regulatory obligations and safety over personal expediency. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves strictly adhering to the designated route and traffic signals, even if it causes a delay. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the fundamental principles of the Bristol Driver's Test Syllabus, which emphasizes safe and lawful driving. Specifically, the Highway Code, which forms the basis of the test in the UK, mandates that drivers obey all traffic signs and signals. Furthermore, ethical considerations of responsible road use dictate that a driver must not endanger others by contravening traffic regulations, regardless of personal circumstances. This approach demonstrates a commitment to public safety and legal compliance, which are paramount in driver assessment. Incorrect approach is analysis. Taking a shortcut through a residential area without obeying the speed limit is professionally unacceptable because it violates the highway code's provisions on speed limits and safe driving in built-up areas. This action demonstrates a disregard for the safety of pedestrians, particularly children and other residents. It also shows a failure to follow the prescribed route, a key component of the driving test. Proceeding through a red traffic light to save time is professionally unacceptable, as it constitutes a serious breach of traffic law and poses an extreme danger to other road users, including pedestrians and cyclists. This action directly contravenes the highway code's explicit instructions regarding traffic signals and demonstrates a complete disregard for the safety of others and the legal framework governing road use. Ignoring the speed limit in the residential area to make up for lost time is professionally unacceptable. This action demonstrates a lack of judgment and a failure to understand the importance of appropriate speed for the conditions, as stipulated by the highway code. Residential areas require lower speeds due to the increased presence of vulnerable road users. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes safety and legal compliance above all else. This involves a conscious assessment of the immediate situation against established rules and ethical guidelines. When faced with a conflict between personal convenience and regulatory requirements, the professional choice is always to uphold the regulations and ensure safety. This requires self-discipline and an understanding that adherence to the rules is not optional, even under pressure. The Bristol driver's test is designed to assess this very capability. Question 20. Consider a scenario where you are driving on Highway 401 in Ontario at 100 km/h. You observe a vehicle ahead braking suddenly and unexpectedly. Your reaction time is 1.5 seconds, and your vehicle's braking efficiency allows for a deceleration of 6 ms/s2. The vehicle ahead is 50 meters away. If you brake normally, your stopping distance will be approximately 70 meters. What is the most appropriate course of action to minimize risk, considering both safety and potential financial implications? Option A. Honk your horn repeatedly and flash your headlights to alert the driver ahead, hoping they will react to your warning. Option B. Initiate controlled braking and prepare to swerve slightly if necessary to maintain a safe stopping distance, accepting a minor financial risk of a scuff or minor damage if a swerve is unavoidable. Option C. Slam on your brakes as hard as possible, prioritizing immediate collision avoidance with the vehicle ahead, regardless of the risk to vehicles behind you. Option D. Continue at your current speed, assuming the driver ahead will correct their braking or that the distance is sufficient. The correct answer is B. Initiate controlled braking and prepare to swerve slightly if necessary to maintain a safe stopping distance, accepting a minor financial risk of a scuff or minor damage if a swerve is unavoidable. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a driver to balance immediate safety concerns with the financial implications of a potential accident. The driver must make a rapid assessment of risk under pressure, considering both the probability of an incident and its potential severity, while also being mindful of the financial consequences that could arise from a collision. Careful judgment is required to avoid unnecessary risks, while also not being overly cautious to the point of impeding traffic flow or causing other hazards. The best professional approach involves a systematic risk assessment that prioritizes safety above all else, while also considering the financial implications. This means accurately estimating the speed difference and the available stopping distances for both vehicles, factoring in road conditions and the driver's own reaction time. The driver should then calculate the potential stopping distance required to avoid a collision and compare it to the available distance. If the available distance is insufficient to guarantee a safe stop, the driver must take evasive action, even if it means a minor financial cost, such as a slight swerve or a controlled braking maneuver that might lead to a minor scuff. This approach is correct because it aligns with the fundamental principles of safe driving, which are enshrined in the Highway Traffic Act of Ontario. Specifically, Section 128, Careless Driving, mandates that drivers must drive with due care and attention and without reasonable consideration for others. Prioritizing a safe stop, even with a minor financial consequence, demonstrates this due care and attention. Furthermore, the principle of avoiding a collision, even at a small cost, reflects an ethical obligation to prevent harm to oneself and others, which is a core tenet of responsible driving. An incorrect approach would be to continue at the current speed, assuming the other driver will react in time. This fails to account for the inherent unpredictability of other road users and the potential for misjudgment. Ethically and regulatorily, this demonstrates a lack of due care and attention, potentially leading to a charge of careless driving under the Highway Traffic Act of Ontario if an accident occurs. Another incorrect approach would be to brake excessively hard and abruptly, potentially causing a rear-end collision with a vehicle following behind. While this might avoid the immediate hazard, it creates a new, potentially more severe, risk and demonstrates a failure to consider the broader traffic environment. This also violates the principle of driving with reasonable consideration for others. Finally, an approach that involves swerving aggressively without a clear assessment of surrounding traffic, even if it avoids the initial hazard, could lead to other dangerous situations and is not a measured response to the risk. The professional reasoning process for such situations involves a rapid, multifaceted assessment. 1. Identify the immediate hazard and its proximity. 2. Estimate the relative speeds and potential impact. 3. Assess available escape routes and stopping distances, considering road conditions and vehicle capabilities. 4. Calculate the minimum safe stopping distance required to avoid collision. 5. Compare required distance with available distance. 6. If insufficient, determine the least risky evasive action, prioritizing collision avoidance and minimizing secondary risks. This systematic approach, grounded in the principles of the Highway Traffic Act of Ontario, ensures that decisions are made with due care, attention, and consideration for all road users.